Chapter 10. Melefir paused and held up her hand. They had been skirting round the great kingdom for an age, along the winding lanes and through the great empty courtyards of the wretched wastes, but they had remained completely unmolested. And that worried her. "'Tis something wrong, Magistrix?" asked Luella, moving to her side. "We should have drawn attention to ourselves by now," she murmured, "and yet we stroll through the wastes, as though it were part of my domain." "Surely that's something to be grateful for?" asked Bartholomew. The technomancer smiled. "Dear Bartholomew, your innocence is refreshing. The wastes are notorious for their roving bands of renegades, oryx, thaumaturgs, and cybrids." "A renegade thaumaturg?" laughed Bartholomew. "That I'd like to see." Melefir fixed him with an impatient stare. Despite his position at the bosom of her household, she really did not like to be interrupted. "In a killing frenzy, a thaumaturg can rip the living heart from a cybrid," she said coldly. "And this is the region of the rogue cybrids, yet they do not approach." "Would they dare attack their own queen?" whispered Luella. "Do not delude yourself," Melefir chastised. "The cybrid that claims my severed head as its prize can take my mantle from the gods themselves, or have you forgotten the myths of our forebears concerning the genesis of the first families? No, we should have been attacked by now." "Do I sound disappointed?" she wondered. "Because I am." It had been far too long since she had honed her skills in true combat. I can only assume that they are otherwise engaged. An ululating cry rose from the distance, the death rattle of a cybrid. "And that would appear to confirm my assumptions," she whooped. "Protect yourselves and follow me." Within half a second, her armor expanded, extending from her arms and legs to create invulnerable gauntlets and boots, while the high collar grew up and round to cover her head with a high-domed helmet with a pointed top and a fluted front. Once Bartholomew and Luella were similarly protected, the three ran towards the source of the noise, the courtyard of griffins, unless her senses deceived her. The technomancer stopped as they entered the courtyard. A human figure, dressed in brightly and tastelessly coloured raiments, and with a thatch of curly blonde hair, was poised like a cat on the far side of the yard, the mutilated bodies of 5 cybrids lying broken around him. Even as Melefir watched, the remaining cybrid, a violent youth that she herself had exiled from the realm of Theosophy, threw himself at the stranger. The cybrid exploded like a melon shot with an arrow, his remains dropping to the ground with a sickening plop. For a moment, the man looked at the bloody mess with an expression of both puzzlement and disgust, and then he appeared to notice the technomancer and her aides and stepped forward. Melefir was proud of Bartholomew's reaction. "Halt! Approach the Magistrix at your peril, stranger." The man shrugged. "Very well. Is it all right if I stay here, or is this too close for the Magistrix?" "Do not mock," snapped Luella. "I wouldn't dream of it," he shrugged. "I'm the doctor, and I seem to be lost." "Lost in the wretched wastes," tutted the technomancer, deciding that it was now safe enough to order her armor to stand down. "Not very wise." She wasn't prepared for the look of happiness on the stranger's face. Ignoring Bartholomew and Luella, he jumped forward and grabbed Melefir's hands in a warm grip. "My dear Mel, you can't imagine how glad I am to see a friendly face in this travesty." He laughed, looking her armor up and down. "Although I can't say that your dress sense has improved." The technomancer snatched her hands away, but her anger was moderated by this madman's odd familiarity, his with her and hers with him, and the fact that he used the name that had been in her vision. Once again, Melefir was forced to ask herself, who in the great kingdom was this Mel? According to the Archimage's flight of airborne oryx, Harclane was busy in the depths of the auric encampment, ordering his toy armies into neat little rows and staging bloodthirsty little wars. The Archimage smiled. If his warlord's previous games of conflict were anything to go by, he would be piling up the bodies for many hours to come, which suited the Archimage's purposes perfectly. He was standing inside the glittering pyramid that surmounted his tower, in a room that no one dare enter, save himself. He knew for a fact that Harclan had made many an attempt to pry open the door to the stairwell that ascended to this, the Archimage's armory. But the mystic wards that protected the door would have needed a Grand Master's abilities to unravel, and Harklen fell far short of that. As he lifted each weapon in turn from its rack, he wondered whether any of his illustrious ancestors had ever had a warlord that they could trust. He knew that his own lineage was descended from a warlord who had successfully wrested the title from his master. Only his own mystical abilities kept the rapacious Harklan at bay. And if Harklan knew that the Archimage planned a visit to the tabernacle, well, in the magic-shrouded corridors of that shining palace, the Archimage would find it difficult to even summon up a spell to best that he travel alone, and through the thaumaturg settlement. If he travelled through his own realm, there was a danger he might run into Harklan. A final reason confirmed his decision. The other routes were either the Cybrid realm or the Wretched Wastes, and the Archimage's spies had warned him that the Technomancer was abroad in the Wastes. Either route would reveal his destination to the prattling Mellifier. Returning to his choice of weapons, he chose a small silver dagger as his only armament. The stiletto of Vos, an elegant weapon whose impressive pedigree of bloodletting was less likely to enrage the gods. He left the armory and headed towards the lift, hoping that, for once, it wasn't in a garrulous mood. He needed to collect his thoughts, and the last thing he wanted was that damned elevator trying to be friendly. "I ask again, stranger, who is this Mel?" "Well." But even as he began, the doctor could see that his companion had been altered by the Codex. Physically, she was the same, although the Bride of Frankenstein hairstyle was a striking improvement. But she had a presence, a regal bearing and an overpowering dignity that was almost tangible. And something else. The doctor didn't doubt for one moment that the Magistrix Mellifier possessed the raw power to destroy him, as she must have destroyed the Cybrids. All he could remember was watching them as they exploded, one by one. And then he put his hand to his head. Where were these names coming from? How did he know so much about the alien environment that surrounded him? The answer was obvious. The Codex had affected him. Indeed, he had been right next to its point of detonation, so how could it not have done? "Magistrix, I apologize," he said chivalrously and bowing deeply. "My conflict with the Cybrids must have unsettled my mind." She laughed. "I'm not surprised. To destroy 6 of the rogues, you must be an adept. Doctor, at least. Perhaps even a Grand Master." He smiled. "Chess was my 4th incarnation's strong point, but I have been known to play a mean opening gambit." He trailed off as the meaning behind her words sank in. "You mean I destroyed them?" "You're too modest, Doctor." She snapped her fingers and gestured for him to take her arm. "Walk with me a while, stranger. Tell me of whence you come." Still reeling from the knowledge that he had murdered the Cybrids, he had to do a double take as he linked his arm round the Technomancer's. Was it his imagination, or was his jacket a shade darker? Filing it away with all of his other questions, he began to explain about his abortive attempt to enter the TARDIS. In the minutes since its disappearance, the Doctor had come to the conclusion that the Hostile Action Displacement System, the HADS, had been activated, but an attack by Cybrids wouldn't have been sufficient grounds for it to abandon him. He froze, well aware of the concerned looks from the Magistrix and her 2 colleagues, both now unarmoured. The TARDIS hadn't abandoned him. It simply hadn't recognized him. "Doctor, are you unwell?" asked the Technomancer. He held up his free hand. No, I'm fine." He gave a reassuring laugh, but he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be reassuring. "You were telling us about yourself," prompted Luella. The doctor hadn't paid her any attention until now, but the face, the voice, the wavy blonde hair, it was Louise Mason. And the stocky man with collar-length brown hair was her friend Barry. It was all too much of a coincidence. He decided to continue, mainly as a means of establishing at least one set of facts. "I tried to open the door of my, cabinet." "A magic cabinet?" asked the man who had once been Barry. "In a manner of speaking, yes, but the key wouldn't turn, and then my, cabinet dematerialized, and then the Cybrids attacked. I take it that they weren't loyal to you, Magistrix?" Another new concept that had popped into his mind, the knowledge that the majority of Cybrids were loyal to Mellifier. She shook her head. "No. Renegades and exiles who lurk in the Wretched Wastes. What did this cabinet look like? Doctor." "It's about 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide, blue with panelled sides and a light on its roof. It's eeled." "The Lady TARDIS," she gasped, pulling free of his grip. He smiled. Obviously, this version of Mel remembered something. Exactly. She raised both hands and snapped her fingers. Luella, Bartholomew, protect yourselves. The technomancer's own armor engulfed her. Listen, there really is no need for this, you know. The doctor started backing away. And the Dark One shall walk the great kingdom, and his first encounter shall be with the Lady Tardis, the goddess in absence from the tabernacle, quoted Luella, slightly muffled through her helmet. It made her words sound like a heavenly pronouncement, which it probably was, the doctor decided. And he shall attempt to breach the Lady Tardis's being, upon which the goddess shall retrench to the tabernacle. Exactly, snapped the technomancer. You may call yourself the doctor, but we know you by another name, a name that dare not be mentioned. The doctor shrugged. I know that my real name is a little difficult to get your tongue round, but isn't that taking it a bit far? Luella, Bartholomew, return to the ziggurat at once, Melifere ordered. But the Dark One, Luella protested mutely through her helmet. I am the Magistrix Melifere, technomancer of the great kingdom, she hissed. The coming of the Dark One is my responsibility, and mine alone. Now go. As soon as they had vanished down one of the alleyways off the courtyard, the technomancer's armor returned to normal, and her expression changed to a welcoming smile. Matters of state are not for underlings. Dark One, and you and I have many things to discuss, do we not? The doctor sighed. The alternative set of memories that was blossoming in his mind indicated that the technomancer was a leading figure in the balance of power in what now passed for London. It wouldn't do any harm to play her along, he decided. Well, that wasn't very nice, was it? Said Luella, hurt by the technomancer's brusque dismissal. We're her trusted confidants. Face it, Lou, snapped Bartholomew. At the end of the day, we're nothing more than servants, cybrids that the technomancer elevated to humanity to keep her company. Luella started to protest, but Bartholomew silenced her with a raised hand. She keeps us around for amusement, nothing more. We're not in the same league as her, and you know it. His tone was a clear indication that he was as upset as she was. So, she shrugged. Back to the ziggurat, I suppose. She placed a finger to her lips and looked around their surroundings. Although I'm not really sure where we are. Perhaps I can help, said Bartholomew brightly. We're in the rogue cybrid section of the wastes. If we keep walking in this direction, we should eventually reach the cybrid settlement. She cocked an eyebrow. I'm impressed, he grinned. Come on, Lou. I've always been able to find my way home. A vital skill for a pisshead like me. Luella stared at him in confusion. I'm sorry, Bart, but I didn't understand a word of that. What's a pisshead? I don't know, he whispered. He sounded frightened. I just don't know where the words came from. He shook his head and pointed towards the grey building with the domed roof, the Cathedral of Lost Souls. Forget it. There's a passageway behind there that leads to the Steps of Nostalgia. From there, we're home and dry. They headed towards the cathedral in silence. The tabernacle. The archimage threw his head back and drank in the glory and the majesty of the heavenly palace before him. The dimensions of the tabernacle were impossible to ascertain. He would stare at a single tower for a second, only to realize that he was looking at a cluster of hundreds of minarets. A small courtyard would become an auditorium upon further inspection. Such are the mysteries of the gods, he decided humbly. The one constant was the material from which the tabernacle was constructed, although the archimage doubted that the gods had used the artisans and labourers that had been responsible for the Tower of Abraxas. Theirs was the ultimate magic. Everything was built from tessellated panes of glass in all the colours of the spectrum, and more besides. And each pane was shining with the light of the gods, casting thousands of shadows and offering millions of reflections. The archimage took a deep breath and looked for an entrance. And yes, there it was. Beyond the reality of a carved buttress was a deeper truth, an arched doorway that shone with the pure illumination of the gods. In his long life, the archimage had faced countless horrors and fought endless foes. He had killed 1,000 cybrids in one night with a single blade. He had stood back to back with his warlord as they defended Abraxas from a renegade army of Oryx, and finally vanquished them, knee-deep in their golden blood. Throughout all of it, he had never flinched, never wavered. Passing through the archway into the home of the gods, he freely admitted that he was terrified. By rights, she should have destroyed the doctor on the spot. "So you think I'm the Dark One, do you?" he asked. The technomancer laughed, a rich giggle. "You arrive in the great kingdom and fulfill the first part of the prophecy. What else am I supposed to think?" "And the name Mel means nothing to you?" he asked. She stopped, withdrew her arm and turned to look at him. "We are alone here, Doctor. We can talk freely without being overheard. The name does mean something, but I'm not sure what. I saw a vision scarcely hours ago, a vision of the great kingdom, but not as it is. But as it could be," he interrupted. "Indeed. And wrapped inside that vision was a young woman of my own aspect, a woman called Mel. Is she known to you, Dark One?" The doctor smiled. "Mel is a good friend, Majestrix, hence my lese majesté upon meeting you. But I must insist that I am not the Dark One." She shrugged. "Doctor or Dark One, you are a stranger in the great kingdom, and that is unheard of." Turning her back on him, she continued, "I am due to meet with the Hierophant. Indeed, I am now overdue. Her request to see me is also unheard of." She span round. "So many unheard ofs, eh? Doctor? Something is terribly amiss in the kingdom, and so far the prophecies would appear to be coming true. If I stand back and let destiny take its course, the kingdom will be consumed in chaos, and the wall of God's tears will fall, releasing the barbarians to ravage the land." Colourful, but probably accurate. I have the most horrible feeling that this entire situation is dynamically unstable. It's tempting to let destiny take its course, but I doubt that everything will fall back in place without a little assistance. Your words mean little, Dark One, but I do not believe that you are as evil as the legends portray. There was something about the stranger, something that invited trust. She pointed towards the black shape of the pinnacle of tongues, with its mysterious covering of dishes. "If we head in that direction, we come out close to the labyrinth of thaumaturgy. The Hierophant is waiting for me." "And me?" The doctor frowned. "Hang on 1 second. Is the Hierophant a middle-aged woman with greying hair? Quite severe?" "An apt description." "Doctor," said the technomancer with a smile, "do you know her?" "In a manner of speaking, yes, and I doubt very much that she will be overjoyed to see me." He took her arm. "But needs must when the devil drives, eh? Majestrix?" He nodded towards the pinnacle. "Shall we go?" Luella tapped Bartholomew on the shoulder. "Where are we going, Bart? Why are we in the encampment?" He ignored her and carried on, knowing exactly where to go. It was no different from any of the other dwellings, but he knew. Despite his elevation to humanity, despite the 10 years that he had been away, he knew exactly where he was headed. And a few seconds later, he was there. "Is this where I think it is?" asked Luella. He nodded. "It's about time, don't you think? Especially if the world is about to come to an end." He knocked on the square doorway of the turquoise pyramid. As far as Bartholomew was concerned, the wait for the door to open could have been an eternity. And then it opened a crack, and an old cybrid, her eyes rheumy, peered from the darkness. "Yes?" And then she stepped back, throwing open the door. "It can't be." Bartholomew leant forward and grabbed the cybrid in a tight hug. It is. I've come home, Mother." He was crying. "I'm home." It was an effort to walk down the vast glass corridor without stopping and staring at the iridescent walls. It was so very tempting, but after less than a second, the surface realities would unfurl, revealing deeper and more terrifying secrets beyond. The Archimage knew that even his great intellect would crumble if he peered too deeply into unspoken truths that no mortal mind could comprehend. The path to the heart of the tabernacle was well known to him, but only in the form of ancient writings in dark tomes. No one had approached this close since the foundation of the great kingdom, when each of the gods had chosen a breeding couple from their respective peoples and elevated them to form the first families. The first Archimage had sketched the plans of the palace in his journal, a journal which had passed from father to eldest son across the generations, but no one had ever put them to practical use. Until now. And the very fact that the Archimage had been able to enter the palace suggested that there was a holy purpose to his journey, a purpose sanctioned by the gods. The corridor came to an abrupt halt with a shimmering wall of multicolored glass, and a fainter heart might have turned back. But the first Archimage's journal warned of the wall and explained that it was only a barrier to the weak and faithless. Bolstering his faith and taking a deep breath, the Archimage stepped decisively through the crystal wall and was in the presence of the gods. Calming himself, the Archimage pronounced the ritual words that would introduce him to the gods, the rich phrases echoing from the walls and ceiling of the awesome chamber in a tinkling mockery. At no time did he look up. To gaze upon the countenances of the gods was heresy. I, Magnus Ashmael, Archimage of Abraxas, do present myself before the three gods of the great kingdom and await your indulgence. Words written when the kingdom was young, but never used before. The silence that erupted after the echoes died away was initially reassuring to the Archimage. At least he hadn't been struck down by a bolt of lightning. But as the minutes dragged by, he began to suspect that something was wrong. Steeling himself, he raised his head and felt the breath freeze in his throat. The first thing he noticed was that the throne of the Lady Tardis, the goddess in absence, was occupied. The blue double cube rested upon her crystal plinth for the first time since the kingdom had been created. This was disturbing enough. Why was the Lady Tardis back in the tabernacle? But when the Archimage saw that the throne belonging to the Lord Yog-Sothoth was empty, he looked around for some explanation, and found it on the throne of Sarah Quazel. Although possession of a graven image was heresy to the extreme, the images of the three gods were known to everyone in the great kingdom, from the lowliest auric serf upwards. So the Archimage knew that the figure on the throne of his own god was terribly, unimaginably wrong. Sarah Quazel's imposing bulk, a golden humanoid with the head of an antelope, writhed on his throne in obvious agony, and the reason for his pain was clear. The emerald-green tetrahedron of Yog-Sothoth was embedded in his body. The two gods fused in an unholy union that beggared the imagination. And there were words, whispered words. His fear counteracted by curiosity, the Archimage ran to the throne to hear what his god was saying, and brought his hands to his head when he realized that it was a stream of gibberish and nonsense words. He stepped back from the throne in mute horror. There was but one explanation. The gods were mad.